Thanks everybody for coming out. Welcome folks to our folklore workshop meeting. A reminder that, is this working okay for people here? Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, you're okay? All right, thank you. A reminder that the workshop meeting is an opportunity for us to review the agenda that will be in front of the board next Tuesday at the board voting meeting. But it also gives us a chance to talk through several of the, or any of the agenda items that need more discussion and review before we vote, and if necessary, where we need to get more information. Before we start tonight, I do want to note that we recently learned of the passing of former school board director Jack Linton. And Jack was an attorney in the area here. He served on the Exeter School Board for many years. He was on the board for about 12 years, from about 2000 to about 2011. He served as vice president. He was president of the board for 2 years. He was one of our board members who was very much involved in the initial efforts to develop an education foundation here, and became a long-term member of that foundation, retiring from that board in 2016. So we owe a large debt to Jack Linton, not only for his work on the board and his dedication to the school district and his work in the community, but also for everything he has done up until very recently to support the school district and support the Education Foundation. So if you could all please just join me for a moment of silence for Jack Linton. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we'll start the evening with a building program report. And Mr. Flam, you're up. We're going to be reviewing your data dashboard for the junior high school.
Thank you, Dr. Hamburger. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ann, for helping me to scroll through this report. Very simply, the top of the first page is demographic information regarding the junior high school. At the bottom of the first page is our achievement scores from the Future Ready PA site, scoring proficient or advanced on PSSA. I will point out that the statewide average, as I spoke about last year, is a bit deceiving because that statewide average, as indicated there, includes eligible test takers grades 3 through 11. So it's not the statewide average for grades 7 and 8, but I'll talk about that on the next page. So when you look at that, it is a bit deceiving. 68.6% shows that we're a little bit over 6 percentage points above the state average in ELA. In math, it shows, according to this, that we're 5 points below the state average, which is not the case. In science, again, it shows that we're slightly below the state average, and again, I'll point out that that's not the case, and I'll show that to you on page 2. Top of page 2, on the left-hand side is 7th grade ELA, on the right-hand side is 8th grade ELA. When you look at the 3-year comparison, we're pretty consistent over those 3 years, both in 7th grade and 8th grade. But when you look at our 7th grade scores compared with the state 7th grade scores only, our scores are approximately 12 points 12 points above the state average, not the 6 that's shown on the first page. On the right-hand side, Exeter's scores last year were 65.7 proficient and advanced, approximately 6 points above the state average. In math, again, 7th grade on the left, 8th grade on the right, our scores proficient and advanced were 43.7% in 7th grade compared with the state average of 38.2. So we were not 5 points below the state average. Instead, we were 5 points above the state average in 7th grade. In 8th grade, we were slightly above the state average, 33.7%, where the state average was 32.2%. Again, slightly above, not 5 points below. On the next page, science, our scores were 66% proficient or advanced. The actual state average for 8th grade students in science last year was 58.2%. On the right-hand side of that page, I show our Algebra 1 Keystone scores. 96.9% of the students who took the Algebra 1 Keystone last year at the junior high scored proficient or advanced, which is expected. They're our best students. Only 4 of the students scored less than proficient. I will point out that of the 126 students who took the Keystone exam, 125 of those students also took the PSSA, and 19% of those students scored less than proficient on the PSSA. At the bottom of this page, we show our growth indicators. In ELA, our academic growth score is 68. In math, which is suggesting that we have not made a year's worth of progress in ELA. In math, 84.7, suggesting that we did make a year's worth of, more than a year's worth of progress, actually, growth. And in science, 79%, indicating that we did make a year's worth of growth. On the next page, when you look at ELA, however, though we didn't make a year's worth of growth in 7th and 8th grade, you can see that the blue bars in comparison with the yellow the previous year indicate that we made much better progress last year than we did in the previous year. And in fact, in the highest quintile of 7th grade and the second and first highest quintiles in 8th grade, we did indeed make a year's worth of progress. In math, as I indicated, we did make a year's worth of progress in both. In every quintile in 7th grade, we made more than a year's worth of progress. In 8th grade, we were slightly below a year's worth of progress in 3 of the 5 quintiles, but above in 2 of the 5. In science, we were above a year's worth of growth in every quintile but the second to lowest. So we're making progress. So, you know, those are some stats from our PSSA and Keystone performance. I will point out, however, that as Dr. Winters talked about at our curriculum committee meeting previously, our students are involved in many different things. So the data is one reflection. But I'll point out that our students have been active and successful in a number of areas in addition to just this one glimpse from the PSSA or Keystone. Kathy Topper and her Math Counts team this past weekend competed at Penn State Berkson Math Counts competition and finished second in the county. 5 of our students placed in the top 22 in the county, 2 in the top 10. 1 student placed 3rd overall and qualified for the state competition. Akil Githapu will compete at the state competition in March. Our Science Olympiad team, our high school team, won the competition, Berks competition in January. Our junior high school team will be competing in March. Our Envirothon team has been extremely successful over the past few years and will be in competition again in May. And our Reading Olympics team, our 2-time defending champion Reading Olympics team, will be in action again in May. Our artists, our Exeter Student Art Show currently is on display at the Berks County Community Foundation through April 24th. Also, our What's So Cool About Manufacturing team in its second year, led by Mr. Adams. I had the pleasure of joining the team on a trip to American Polarizers Incorporated, and the students interviewed the owners and a number of employees, took some video clips, and are in the process of putting together a video presentation for a competition, and will be present on March 3rd in the evening when awards are distributed. Last year, the team won an award for editing, and so we're looking forward to that as well. They've done a really nice job. In addition, 10 of our students made county chorus, and I know a number of others would be auditioning for the editing registry as well. So that's my report for this evening. Any question?
I just want to say I went to the art show at the Community Foundation. I encourage everybody to go. It's a fantastic show. And as you say, it's on until April, I think?
April 24th.
Yeah, good. I encourage it. I do have a question about the 7th and 8th grade math PSSA 3-year comparison. I was never very good at numbers myself, but Mrs. Mulholland in kindergarten taught us colors well. And I see that the basic and below categories, particularly in 8th grade, are far and away above the advanced and proficient. What can you tell us that you're doing about that problem?
Well, we're doing everything we can to align curriculum. I think that's one of the things that we're doing. We're also investigating what's happening systemically in mathematics. But in terms of 7th and 8th grade, our teachers are working extremely hard to identify students who need additional help. We offer a learning support math course, but we also offer a learning support math strategies class for students who are struggling in math as well. So we're trying to provide as much intervention as possible, but we can use help, truthfully. And so it's an area that we're looking at in terms of providing additional interventions for students who are not identified with IEPs. We're also looking at benchmark testing. What other options are available for us in terms of benchmark testing? We're going to be piloting the CDT test in May and looking at those results in Flex Day over the summer and making a decision about the direction we want to go with our benchmark testing, hopefully to provide our teachers with more accurate data and more usable data in the future. So it's definitely an area that's of interest to us to pursue, and we're going to do so in different ways.
I would also add too, we recently had some professional development that was organized by Ms. Wallach, where we had somebody from PDE come in who works in the assessment office that provided some targeted professional development around not only open-ended responses on the math assessment and how those can be answered and what kinds of things the state is looking for in those responses, but just, in general, how we can help our students better understand the test design. We've also taken a look at the calculator piece. The students are allowed to use calculators on that assessment, and trying to figure out, are the calculators that our students have, number one, does every single kid have access to one come time for PSSAs, and number two, are the ones that we have the right ones for kids to be using to maximize their success. So those are two kind of immediate things that are happening right now, with some additional targeted work slated for the summer.
Okay. I would just ask, keep the board apprised of this, and also let us know if we can help in any way. Sometimes the best way a board can help is by just getting out of your way and letting you fix it yourself, but please keep us apprised. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Flam, building off of John's question, I'm wondering if you can maybe help me read between the lines about why there's such a large difference between our performance in ELA and our performance in math. It almost seems like there's a reverse of the scores for both the 8th grade and the 7th grade cohort. Maybe that's a little bit of rounding up, but there's a big difference between who's performing advanced and proficient in ELA, both in 7th and 8th grade, versus math in 7th and 8th
Well, I think the state average can be an indicator of that as well. The state average in ELA is much greater than the state average in math. When you look at the 8th grade state average in math at 32.2%, it speaks to the rigor of that test. And so I think for the most part, it's an indication that the test itself is skewed. But I think we provide a little bit more intervention in ELA than we do it in math currently. So historically, I think our students have scored better in math since the test, or in ELA since the test has changed, as have students across the state.
The one benchmarking exam that you talked about, is that for both ELA or is that just for math? Is that both for ELA and math, or is it just for one or the other?
Could be for both.
Okay.
But we're looking, at whatever we can do to help in both areas. So, we've used the STAR assessment in ELA for years as part of the AR program. So I think there was a comfort level there with that assessment. But the CDT, I think, may be a better indicator of where students are, and may align better to the PSSA than the STAR assessment does in math. So we're going to pilot that in May and take a look at the results and maybe go in that direction.
And I think to kind of add to that, part of what got the conversation around the CDT started, which stands for Classroom Diagnostic Test, is that as we are kind of looking at this idea, we've talked about return on investment at business functions committee meetings, and the STAR assessment that we pay for, it's not free. It costs money, and it's also a national assessment, so it's nationally normed. And while they have linking studies with PA and that type of thing, the CDT is a PA-specific assessment developed by PDE, and it's also free. And so, we've had a lot of conversations around if that assessment is going to yield better data for our math teachers to plan instructionally, then why wouldn't we go that route and use a free assessment and stop spending money on STAR math for those grade levels? And so we're kind of putting it in the hands of the teachers to get their feedback. Like Mr. Flam said, they're going to pilot it in May. We chose that time because PSSAs are over, Keystones are over. It's a time when they can really focus. And then after the CDTs are done, we're going to have Josh Hoyt from DCIU come in. He's the math lead there, work with our teachers to look at the reports, look at the data, and then allow them to make a recommendation to Mr. Flam and Ms. Wallach in terms of, is this giving us a more robust data set than STAR, and will it serve us better? And if the answer is yes, then that's what we're going to do.
So I think what I hear you guys identifying the challenges is the rigor of the exam that we're using as our only, I guess, maybe universal benchmark, and then also the vertical alignment between grades for our curriculum. Are those the two challenges there are, or are there other ones that are more widespread that we'll have to address at some point?
Well, I think those are the two primary, but I think, our ongoing work to align the curriculum as well is really important. So, that's work that will continue.
One we have a whole lot more control over. That's the curriculum alignment piece. That's just taking the time, getting the right folks to the table and doing it. The other, what the state decides to do with the assessment, adjusting it, modifying it, we have less control over that. Obviously, like Mr. Flam said, the data indicates, hopefully there are individuals that at PDE that are taking a look at the math PSSA and saying, wait a minute, if only 32% of the 8th graders in the state of Pennsylvania can be proficient on this assessment, then what's not adding up here? I think the other piece is figuring out how we can get more job-embedded PD for our teachers, figuring out what that looks like.
And this will be my last question, I promise. I guess what I'm drawing as a conclusion from those answers is that we're confident that the students moving into the high school and moving beyond that are prepared largely for what they need to be able to accomplish in high school math and beyond that. So the question isn't as much that our students aren't prepared and aren't knowledgeable about Algebra 1 enough to move forward. It's really the way that the data is being captured currently.
I think that's a fairly accurate statement, especially when you look at 126 kids taking the Keystone exam, 125 taking PSSA, and 97% being proficient or advanced in the Keystone, and of those, 19% not proficient in PSSA. PSSA math is a broad, very broad test, and it's a challenge. So the Keystone exam, which is a much more narrow test focused on Algebra 1, is, for many of our students, an easier test to take than the PSSA math. It's an extremely rigorous test, and as indicated by scores across the state.
The other thing I would say as a predictor is when we look at our math SAT data, our students at the high school mathematically in terms of SAT are performing, very well, comparatively speaking, against other students, in the same, age that is taking that assessment. So if you look at that as a predictor in terms of preparedness for higher level math in high school, and to have 126 kids taking Algebra 1 at the junior high, some of which are 7th graders as well, there are opportunities. Think about a 7th grader taking Algebra 1, probably taking Algebra 2 in 8th grade, taking geometry as a freshman. That student has a real opportunity to go Calc BC or Calc BC and AP statistics if they wanted to. And when you look at the math counts example that Eric gave, our students are performing very well with that as well. So by other different, not PA specific measures, I would contend that our students in high school are prepared to be successful in math.
I just want to point something out because I just saw it on the Soaring Eagle document that it looked like that there's 5 different options for 8th graders to take math courses. Is that correct? I think it was geometry, accelerated algebra 1,
That's
algebra
correct.
1, and then a regular core.
CC3.
And I kind of think that plays into this as well, because we have some kids, like you kind of just said, that are really starting to focus, their math, and yet the test is still very broad. So I wonder what percentage of our students are really either focusing on high-end different maths or still trying to get the basics and have caught up. So maybe there's just a small portion of our students who are actually getting the core, well-rounded math program.
It's a good point. I will say that the students who are taking geometry in 8th grade have already taken the Keystone exam in 7th grade. The Algebra 1, the honors algebra, of course, the core connections algebra, and the next level algebra 1 course, which is algebra connections, the focus is on that. It's on algebra. And so the challenge for the teacher is to make sure that they're covering the standards that students are going to see in the 8th grade PSSA. Not an easy task. But as I said, our students perform exceptionally well in algebra 1, so, which is a good indicator. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Nice job.
Next one.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the agenda, and we have Mr. Zui, and we have a report this evening on our recycling plan. Welcome, sir.
Good evening. So hopefully you all received the report in your packets. I won't read it line item by line item. It can be rather boring to some, exciting to others. So I could just stand here and answer any questions you have or listen to any issues you might be worried about or any other topics you'd like to discuss regarding our recycling program.
Can you summarize maybe the report, just so everybody gets, especially people sitting in the audience, get a little bit of a report, but focusing on some of the areas that we've discussed about recycling bins.
Right. So
different types of recycling.
the district utilizes, with our waste management provider, Advanced Disposal, who we're contracted through the DCIU through cooperative bid. We utilize single stream recycling, which means that every single piece of recyclable material that we produce goes into one container to be picked up by our waste management contractor. So cardboard, plastic, glass, paper, everything goes into one dumpster. We have trash dumpsters and we have recycling dumpsters. So all that material is picked up by the vendor and then sorted at their facility and recycled and sent to different recycling centers from there. So, per the buildings, all the buildings are a little bit different as far as their, where their containers are located or how many containers they have. Usually the facilities department supports the principals and the administration if they request additional containers or to put containers in places where they currently don't have them. We acquire them, we set them out, and my custodial staff's responsible for bringing that recycling material out into the dumpster. So.
Do you find that the staff and students are doing a good job of actually using the recycling bins, or your custodial staff, are they finding recyclable material in the?
That happens, but I wouldn't say that happens a lot. You know, all our custodial carts have 2 cans on them, regular trash and recycling, and so, you know, if there is not recycling going on, that might be an issue with not having containers readily available or in close proximity. But on you know, on the whole, we do recycle quite a bit of material in the district. So, and again, as the report says, a lot of it is mostly cardboard packaging from shipments from my supplies to books to copy paper, all that stuff.
I've had this discussion before, but you know, the one area where it's very difficult to recycle is in our cafeterias, where so much of the potentially recyclable material is contaminated with food. What can you say about what is not being recycled in our cafeterias, which is heavily dependent upon plastics and throwaway materials for student lunches?
I really couldn't speak to that. I don't have that information readily available to me. I only hear, complaints or criticisms from other departments and stuff about the utensils. Obviously, utensils would be a difficult thing to recycle because of the contamination, but any kind of drink bottle would be fine to be recycled. It wouldn't necessarily be considered contaminated just because it had liquid in it and it's empty. If it's full, that would be trash as opposed to recycling.
We hear all the time that recyclable plastics, single-use plastics, are harder and harder to market for recyclers. Those who actually take the materials and try to resell them and recover them, put them back into a useful product. So a lot of institutions are really trying their best to eliminate even recyclables and move toward reusable products. Do you have any recommendations for what we might be able to do in terms of trying to cut down on our throwaway?
Well, I think
single-use plastics.
Yeah. Well, I think the 2 biggest areas there would probably be the food service items, but then again, if you go to good old-fashioned silverware and ceramic plates, then you've got dishwashing, and you've got dishwashing chemicals, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the environment either. But I really don't have many answers for that. And I guess the other thing would be the buzz around the district is the bottle filling stations. So I do have some information regarding those. The number of water fountains we have in the district and pricing on what bottle filling stations cost. So.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about the idea of one way would be to cut back on the sale or encouraging students to use reusable bottles as opposed to throwaway single-use plastic bottles for water, and maybe cut back on our sales in that area and look into the kind of reverse osmosis or carbon block.
Yeah, the pricing I got was for the carbon block. I did try to research the reverse osmosis, and those are more filtration systems that are independent from the drinking fountains. That's more something you install either on the front end of the fountain or right at the water source coming into the building. So,
And you don't have to necessarily put all of your water in the building through an RO system.
No, and we would, we have 79 water fountains district-wide, and we wouldn't have to replace every single one with a bottle filling station, because that would cost about $100,000. So, but I think strategically, cafeterias, the senior high school, the gym area, the athletic area, the lobby area, the theater, in the cafeterias, even at all the elementary schools too. I think we could probably get a list together of strategic locations throughout the building where that might make an impact.
And how would you describe the difference between the RO system and the carbon block system?
Well, God, it's a lot of science for a facilities guy. The reverse osmosis uses like a membrane, and where the filter is more porous, and it is a different kind of system. And the reverse osmosis uses like the pressure with the membrane to filter the water. So, I mean, it's really from what I read, it's major fame or usage is in desalination. So, but yeah, the charcoal block filters or the carbon block filters are pretty standard.
So that might be more preferable in terms of cost
Oh, yes,
and ongoing maintenance?
yes.
Okay.
And just to give you an idea, I got a quote for 10 of the bottle filling stations with a carbon block filter, and they're $1,200 a piece. So that's for 10. So if I wanted one, it'd be a little bit more. If I ordered 50, it'd be a little less. But then this price expires February 24th. You can only hold their prices for 30 days. So I'm assuming when they tell me that if I ask on February 25th, it's going to be a little bit more.
Does that include installation, or is that?
No.
We would do the installation.
Depending on how many fountains I need to install. It's just for a staffing wise. So.
Yeah. And I think we were talking a little bit about maybe some creative financing.
Yeah.
For these VC.
The Ed Foundation, I think, is working on something.
Yeah. Are there any additional questions?
Rob, are you hearing any rumblings from, what is it, Advanced Disposal? Is that the contractor?
Mm-hmm.
About China's decision 2 years ago? China used to, up until 2 years ago, China accepted 1/2 of the world's recycling.
Right.
And they stopped doing that. So it's called Operation Sword or something. Have you
Well,
heard anything from
they
them about
haven't rumbled
pricing?
any to me, but
Okay.
they're through the BCIU, and it's a fixed price bid. So if it's their responsibility to capture that in their bid.
Okay.
If that money's going to be more, they have been historically since I've been here. They have been the lowest bid through the IU for our trash and recycling services. So that's who we have.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So my question is, no matter if we have one container or one box of recycled waste versus a whole stack of it, it's still the same price no matter what if we go through recycling, is that correct? Like that
Yeah.
one over here is for this building, they pick up that one, it's still gonna be the same price.
Yeah, if you look
for
at
every one of them.
the table on the back of the report,
Yeah,
they
so-
pick us up, and I don't remember the frequencies off the top of my head, but it's not daily, but it's once a week or twice a week for bigger schools.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, whatever's in there, that's what we get charged for the pickup. They don't do it by weight, but they're always pretty full. And in fact, especially in the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, we're frequently calling for additional pickups, because that's a time where a lot of recyclables are being generated in boxes. And
So even if we have more pickups, it's still gonna be the same rate no matter what, basically.
what do you mean more pickups?
Like if they have to pick up more recycling that week, hey, can you come and pick this up? It's still the same
Oh,
price.
they would charge us for.
Oh, charge, okay.
Yes. Like it's per the contract that's how many times a week they pick up. And that also scales back in the summertime. Trash and recycling.
So Rob, I just had a question around the containers. There's only 16 in the high school, according to your chart.
Mm-hmm.
So yet they're picking up as much as they are at the junior high.
I think there's 21 now, actually. There was some on the loading dock yesterday morning. I know that Principal Campbell was working with Eric Warsaw, my custodial supervisor, to acquire some more. So really, that's a building level decision on where those are placed. And I think the senior high school is the centralized one where people are bringing their recycling to certain recycling locations as opposed to having a can in every classroom. So, yep.
And recycling includes not just plastics, but it's also paper.
Paper, plastics, cardboard.
Aluminum
yes,
cans.
glass.
Yeah. So they're commingled, which is typical. I mean, that's how we get ours curbside
Yeah.
in the township as well. You know, I think this is important. You know, we not only have a responsibility, I think, you know, as a governmental organization to kind of ensure that we're good stewards of the environment. We're also teaching kids, you know, in the process. You know, we're teaching them about you know, conservation, you know, and care and concern for, you know, our natural resources in our community. So what I'm concerned about is when we don't adequately recycle, or if we don't enforce recycling, that we send the wrong message to students who take that message home to their families as well. So I think it's something we need to continually work on and continue to refine and improve in any way we can. And I look to you guys to continue to find ways to be more efficient and better at optimizing our recycling, and also finding ways to reduce and reuse what we have. And that includes, I think, the cafeteria and what we do there in terms of pretty much everything is thrown away in the trash in the cafeteria, which includes tons of plastic. So thank you for the report tonight. Anybody else have any questions?
So will we be putting an item on the agenda next week for the water bottles?
Filling stations.
Filling stations.
I don't know, do we have we secured?
No, that
Grant application's due in March.
That grant has just been written, so that.
Yeah, I would almost think, Mike, that we would want to wait until we secure the grant and then authorize the use of the grant for purchase of a certain number that are recommended by facilities. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
The other thing I just learned about today is that Mascaro is going to continue their Respect program and offering, you know, buildings the chance to write grants. It's not in the identical capacity as in past years. And so, you know, one of the things that we may want to talk about and consider related to that is maybe trying to purchase some different kinds of containers for the elementary building that are distinguishably different, like as opposed to a trash can and a recycling bin that may look the same but be a different color. Maybe there are certain ones you can buy that have a special kind of lid with like a small hole in the top that when you're trying to teach a kindergartner, you know, what the difference is between a trash can and a recycling bin, you know, that may help in the education process. So I just got that information today. I haven't read through it all, you know, very, very closely, but there may be an opportunity there as kind of something small, you know, through some Respect grants at certain buildings where we could possibly look at that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really important is just clearly marked containers, so that you're absolutely sure what's a recycling container and what's a trash container. You know, if they're not clearly marked, they look like a disposal. You know, regardless of the size of opening or whatever. Well, thank you.
No problem.
Working on that. The next item on the agenda is public comments, an opportunity for folks in the audience to address the board on any topic related to the agenda or anything else that might be to the benefit of the school district. Just please state your name and your address.
Good evening, Timothy. You hear me? Timothy Morgan, Farming Ridge Boulevard. I provide you all a copy of the press release of what I'm going to talk about. If anybody's watched the news yesterday or today, you might have noticed it's the New Hampshire primary. If you got past that, there was a small blip, about 15 seconds yesterday, that the Trump administration, with the partnering of a group from Parkland, Florida, where the mass shooting was 2 years ago, has developed and launched a site that was launched yesterday afternoon called schoolsafety.gov. I had an opportunity to go on that site today very briefly. The site is designed specifically with school districts in mind, where it kind of gives you the opportunity to do an assessment of where your school district is with these kind of threat assessments, cyberbullying, all kinds of resources. It breaks it down for parents, for districts, for boards, for administrators, for teachers. It's a portal that's now being used, hopefully in the future, specifically for all of you. It's been designed not only by school districts who unfortunately have succumbed to this kind of violence, but also by professionals and counselors that have had the opportunity to work with the government to put this together. It's a free resource to us, and I just would encourage the board to maybe take a strong look at this to make sure that we are, as a district, where we need to be and that we're continuing to stay on that pathway. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. As you know, Dr. Miller is our administrator who's in charge of our safety and security program, and she's not here this evening. She'll be sure to get this information. She may even be already aware of it. I know there are other resources that are available here in Pennsylvania. I know we have a really rigorous system throughout 44 here in Pennsylvania in terms of threat assessment, training, all hazards plans, on and on and on. So this is obviously another resource for us to be able to utilize, and I think it's appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, I think it's really good, and I think it's good that it's been designed not only by the government, for what that's worth, but by by districts that have been succumbed to this and what they've learned from it and how they're moving forward. Obviously, predictability is always going to be an issue, but it talks about threat assessment, but it also talks about preparedness, and it also talks about recovery. So it's universal. I think it's something that the government's trying to get as a universal system, and I think that any information is good information, so I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just along that lines, with Dr. Miller's impending retirement, will we be naming a new person to fulfill that security function before she departs?
Yeah.
I didn't know yet. Did we have any conversations about that?
As an administrative group, we've already started those conversations. We're putting together a plan on what to do, short-term, long-term.
Mr. Wall. Your name and your address.
Good evening, Tim DeWalt. I guess my address is Rifton School. I live in Governor Mifflin. I am a 38-year veteran art teacher here in the district, and wanted tonight to just speak briefly about the great things happening in the art department. I know you get the postcards and you get the other items, but I felt compelled to come this evening and just touch briefly about some of the things happening. So surrounding you every board meeting is artwork, but my, do we at the moment have artwork all over this county and beyond, actually. Right now is the show at the Berks County Community Foundation, 3rd and Court. It features all Exeter work. There's about 125 pieces. It will be there for 3 months. Concurrently, soon going up is the BCIU show at the Goggle Works. That will be our high school students. The month of March, we'll have another 100-some pieces of work at the Exeter Community Library. That probably is our biggest show, and the accolades and the comments that we receive from our community, it's truly wonderful. Also, the Yoakum Institute show just closed. So we had work over there in West Lawn for that. You can see awards that were earned there. The art show coming up with Scholastic, which is a big one at Kutztown University. Most of probably our best work from senior high school is entered into that show, even over the BCIU show. And then, of course, you see awards that have been won, and then from there we go on down to the upcoming art shows that will happen here in the district. So I just wanted to point all those things out to you. make you aware of them, and hope you get to see some of that work. Thank you. The show at the foundation, it's well documented on the back of your card that you received. The hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. The foundation is closed Saturdays and Sundays. We had the opening reception on this past Sunday and had well over 200 people over that 2-hour span. And Frankie Aiken, who is the COO, I believe, of the foundation, and a resident of Exeter, was thrilled with the turnout. So we did well.
Thank you, Mr. DeWall.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Mr.
Yeah.
DeWall, I'm sorry, this says Volume 1, Issue 1. Is this something that's going to be coming out on a regular basis, and how do we find it? Where do we look for it?
Well, we hope so. And how do we find it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how we would electronically, Dr. Phillips, share this with others. I don't know if this document could be, for Youth Art Month, which is the month of March, it would be nice, certainly, that all Exeter employees receive this.
We can certainly put it on our website as well.
Right, right.
Send that to me tomorrow, and I'll make sure Joey gets it.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Good evening. Mike Burkhart, 6133 Pondview Drive, in Exeter. Do voluntarily do work with the Relay for Life in the vicinity here. Our relay in the past was the Relay for Life of Exeter. Now it's actually called the Berks Regional Relay for Life because we've actually taken on teams from other relays. What we're doing, trying to do an effort as far as getting more student involvement as well as community involvement here in Exeter as far as with the event, which is this coming summer, actually Saturday, June 13th, over at Don Thomas Stadium from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. One of the things that we were looking into doing, obviously at any of the levels with the schools, was getting some teams, more team involvement. But one thing, which is a goal that we've changed direction and are doing now, and I'm happy to actually say that that we are making headway with that, is we're going to, I don't know if anybody in here has been to an event, I'm sure a lot of people have, but we sell the Luminaria bags for $10 a piece. Obviously all the money that we make goes towards the American Cancer Society. What we were thinking, which is in the same vein as what they do at Pottstown's relay, is we would like to go to some of the schools as far as to try to get some. Now these would be free, these wouldn't be for that charge, but we're trying to get the word out as far as in the schools with the younger kids, decorating bags in memory of, in honor of, maybe for grandparents or a neighbor, a friend, they would get some of that cancer awareness, that education, but and we have Amy Beakley, who actually I wanted to thank Dr. Ann Hearing. I believe Amy talked with Ann, and we were able to get the information over to Dr. Christy Howler at Owatton Creek Elementary School, and I just wanted to say that we had a lot of success there. Actually, we were talking with Christy tonight. We're going to get 300 bags for Owatton Creek, and they're going to be able to hand them out to the students from kindergarten, I think first to second grade, and as far as to decorate them and come back. And then what our plan is at the relay itself, we will have a really neat area set up with a design made from these bags lit up, that then the students and obviously family, friends, neighbor, can come to check out. But it's pretty encouraging. It's a new, it's a new development, which is very positive for us. And like I said, I strongly, anybody who hasn't come out to it, please come out to the event. And like I said, we'll keep trying as far as with the team, with the involvement and the community involvement. Thank you.
Mr. Burkhardt, you say this is, it's regional now, Berks Regional, I mean, how large is the region?
The reason why we changed the name, like I said before, it was always at Exeter. But now, the one relay over at Schuylkill Valley High School folded. So a lot of people from that area, Reading used to have one, they folded. You know, we've gotten some teams from Western Berks, which is more out toward Wilson. So it's pretty wide, and we've been trying to get, you know, some of those teams. In all honesty, the one that's the hardest for some reason to get into though is some of the ones right here at Exeter. You know, so and we're working on it, but you know, I do what I can do. But it's a great event. Like I said, anybody who has gone to it, or you know, we get. I will say we've in the past had very strong with Tom Legath. I've dealt with Dr. Phillips, you know, this year. But we with Tom Legath as far as getting with the athletic department, and they're a big help. The day of relay, so a football team, you know, some other members of some sports teams, you know, do show up and they help, you know, with getting people over at the stadium, you know, getting their tent site, you know, helping get stuff set up, you know, and stuff like that. And we appreciate that.
Well, no, I mean, we've been trying to drum up business. It's just, I don't think business has been as good as we'd like with the different teams and so forth. But yeah, the district is willing to support as we can, and I'll continue to talk to Mr. Legath and to talk to some of the coaches.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Herring, for getting the ball rolling, you know, and stuff as well. So, thank you.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your fundraising efforts for the American Cancer Society. Also, is there any possibility of linking these folks with the Thon group that's doing some stuff? Just, I mean, I know it's a separate thing, but
we did reach out to them. Their focus, I mean, you know, we've met a few times already, and you know, I've got Mr. Legath talking to coaches and advisors and the kids and things like that. They really have been focused on Thon and don't seem to want to catch hold of this. So we're trying to do what we can to get some other groups involved.
That's why this kind of, you know, I mean, and I'm still trying, you know, to do that. I mean, I think over at the high school, you know, with efforts with Ann Thomas now helping, which is great, she's helped us in the past too. They're trying to form a team through Y Teens. And in Y Teens, I think instead of having multiple teams, they're going to just focus on keeping everyone to the Y Teens relay team. And that's good, you know, it's fine, you know. So, you know, always just trying for improvement and stuff and everything like that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
I think we'll move on through our agenda. Next week, we'll be approving 2 sets of minutes for the workshop meeting and the voting meeting in January. In terms of school board action, we'll be seeking to appoint Mrs. Guidish as a representative to the Berks County Tax Collection Committee. Is there anything you want to say about that, Mrs. Guidish, in terms of what that entails?
Well, I have been representative, and it's appointed annually, and somehow it fell off the agenda for December. But in any event, this has already been done class, and they have the board, and each school district and municipality has a representative and an alternate. And if anyone's interested in being an alternate, let me know, the board member. In the event that I can attend quarterly meetings, and basically we hear from the staff at EIT and the board what is going on in the operation.
And I might be putting you on the spot with this question, and I'm not sure you're going to know the answer, but do you know if somebody can serve as the representative or delegate for 2 organizations? Because I just got a very similar email from the IT Bureau, I think Friday, about having a representative from Bracknell Township, which I have to be now, so.
I'll double check, but I think you can.
Okay. So if that's the case, we can put me on as the alternate. So.
Because when they do the roll call, you can say.
I can't wait.
Thanks, Mrs. Guidish. Moving into policies, we have several policies that are up for second reading. So look through the list. It begins with the suspension and expulsion, opening exercises for flag displays, contracted service personnel, suicide awareness, prevention, and response, automatic or AEDs and CPR devices in the schools, and then finally maintaining professional adult student boundaries. Personnel committee did address some questions in regard to the last policy, the one that maintains the adult student boundaries. And I know there have been some comments and some concerns voiced by board members. So we modified the policy to kind of make sure it's understood and clearly maybe more strategically placed in the policy that there are certainly exceptions to some of the conditions under which someone might violate that policy. For instance, if you ask a student to come over to your house, that may be inappropriate if you're an employee and you have no other type of relationship associated with that student. However, if it's a friend of the family, if it's a friend of your own child, and you're a teacher asking that person, that student to come over, that would be considered an exception. And so we're really clear in the policy to try to make sure that it's recognized that exceptions exist to this policy, and it shouldn't be taken, literally, every one of these items. These are simply examples of things to avoid in a potential conflict when a student and teacher have what would appear to be, would have the appearance of an inappropriately close relationship. So I don't know if anyone has any further questions about that or wants to discuss that further. We can delve into it as much as you like, but I think rather than pulling out any of those items or rewording those items, we made it very clear that there were exceptions to the rule, and we noted that the policy has a whole section on exceptions.
Can I just, I know Dr. Herring had spoke at the last meeting about the suicide awareness number. So I had Dr. Miller check on that. Her report is that that's a national hotline number that's changed. Locally, it hasn't to this point, but they're actually reaching out to the state level to make sure that they're on top of it and they have the right number.
I just, on this policy, I just think that we need to be really clear about who reports what to whom and when. As you look at page 5 of the policy, reporting inappropriate or suspicious conduct, there's sort of different thresholds for different people. So I just, if you look at paragraphs 3 and 4, I would just, again, make sure that we have lots of clarity around that. Under the investigation, I think we should make it very clear who is conducting the investigation and how that investigation will be conducted. And at what point it becomes more than just a school investigation.
Okay, well, do you have any, we're going to be looking at this for second reading. Are you suggesting we make some changes to the policy?
I do have recommendations. I won't get into it right now, but my final point is that the district at its sole discretion may require independent contractors and employees or active students or are present on the school grounds receive training on this policy and related procedures. I'd like to know whose discretion and based on what.
So would you be able to, put your suggestions or thoughts in an email, send those to Donna Napoli, and then they'll be distributed to our committee members and our administration, and we'll make some modifications to that policy if necessary. And try it. So we may want to back this policy up again. I know this has been probably we've talked about the policy before, and there's no reason why we can't continue to do that, but maybe we move this off the second reading and put it into the first reading. So I'm going to suggest we just shift this to first reading if we could for the next agenda, so we can then have a discussion on new language.
I think it's an entirely appropriate policy. I would like to not leave it open to interpretation.
Yeah, I don't recall whether or not the policy requires an administrative regulation or further elaboration in terms of delegation of responsibility, authority, reporting protocol, and all that sort of thing. So we will need to examine that a bit more.
Sure.
Yep.
And Dave, you just said something that also was another, could you explain the difference between a policy and administrative regulation, where they reside, and, you know, are they equally available to all staff and the public? And because I know we've moved some policies over to AR, and, you know, just sort of trying to understand what that is and why it is.
That's a good question, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk about that. Policies are, you know, the responsibility of the board to develop. And policies are available to anyone who has access to the internet, goes onto our website. They can be found through the website, and I think are relatively easy to find. Administrative regulations are promulgated by the administration and usually referenced in the policy. You know, the policy will oftentimes say, you know, the superintendent or designee will establish administrative regulations for the implementation of this policy. And when that's the case, it's out of the board's hands for the most part. It's the responsibility of the superintendent and administration to really design and develop those. We do have a service with PSBA. We've expanded our service so that not only do we get, you know, sample policies, we also get sample administrative regulations. So, but it's hard keeping up with that. And I know with everything else that happens, you know, with the administration, it's hard staying on top of it. So I know you use your summertime, you use other.
Yeah, she'll put a couple on at once, but
Yeah, but
we'll
it's,
talk to her about trying to keep up with that.
usually, you know, it's suggested very strongly that the board has no involvement in approving ARs, as long as they are consistent and compliant and don't supersede policy in any way. But they can be as detailed as they need to be in order for the implementation of the policy, and they're usually helpful in providing guidance. We like to keep them on the website where we can and attach them to the actual policy where it's appropriate, so that it's accessible not only to our administration but also to our families and anyone who accesses the website. So yeah, it should be available to see, Mike, as long as it's something, for some reason, it may not be appropriate for, it may be strictly for the use of administration for whatever reason that may be.
And it shouldn't be that much. I know last time I spoke to Donna, she's reaching out to the certain groups that are developing these ARs to get them done so we can have them put on. We'll see her again tomorrow and see where we are.
Yeah.
So in the hierarchy of rules, does the policy supersede the AR?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, policy is the governing document, and the AR is sort of the implementation with more detail, more information to help the administration understand how to do it consistently, you know, and with enough detail to provide guidance. You know, just knowledge of.
I've got a question. Are there policies that don't have an accompanying administrative regulation, and are there ARs that don't have an accompanying policy?
No, there are no ARs that don't have a policy, but there are many policies that don't have an AR. So you have to have a policy to have an AR, because
Right.
the AR is the implementation of that policy.
Offhand, can you think of a policy that exists without an AR? Just a quick
Sure.
example.
I mean, all the 000 policies have no ARs.
Oh, for the board,
Yeah.
for what we do, got it, okay.
But I mean, I mean, it's kind of hard because, you know, we really haven't gotten to the point where we included all the ARs, and if you read through the policy language, it'll say pretty clearly somewhere within that document about, you know, the superintendent designate developing administrative regulation for the implementation of the policy. And many times, as we've done, and we may even do this evening, the leading policies, but we're recommending that they develop into an administrative regulation to be attached to another policy. To cut down on some of the policies.
As we come back around and finish through our whole systematic review of our policies, do you think there might be any wisdom in making sure that as we come back through and start going back through, but maybe not with the same urgency that we had before, because some of those policies have not been updated in many years, that would be an appropriate time to say, we want to make sure that ARs are adopted with these policies.
Yeah.
So that they're done simultaneously, rather than what we've been doing now is, I think, prioritizing getting through the entire policy manual, rather than making sure all the pieces for the ARs are there as well.
Really the responsibility of the administration to keep up with that. You know, and it's kind of the superintendent's call in terms of how aggressive he wants to be.
Well,
to try
I
to
mean, this is the
keep up
second
with
time
this.
we're coming around with it, so
Yeah.
we'll be a little bit more aggressive with
Yeah.
this needs to get to the board level.
Yeah,
My-
I mean,
my-
we also have, I mean, PSBA issues a PNN periodically, maybe every quarter. And that establishes guidance for districts in terms of all the new case law, any new modifications to existing law that would require policy change. So that's a really important document that we're supposed to be looking at. We're not looking at that quite with as much rigor as we should right now, but that'll be the role of the policy committee. Mr. Miller and I will be doing that, you know, once we get through this section. These getting up to speed pretty quickly on policy.
I can tell you, an email will go out tomorrow to who's in charge of AR stuff and completed by the next few weeks, and they'll be coming in quicker.
Many of these policies you could probably tie an administrator. For instance, there's HR policies. Obviously, we have an HR director who should really be kind of looking at ARs. We've got, you know, student services policies. That should be our people services.
And we have templates that are readily available for them, so it's not coming from.
Yeah, right. So, so going into some of the new policies here, there were a couple, I'm just gonna highlight. I sent out a sort of a narrative of some of the changes to board members. And we received an important PSBA alert for two policies, policy 220 and 913. 220 is student expression, distribution, and posting materials. And 913 was non-school organizations, groups, and individuals. And these were two policies that were we were notified that there's a group called the Independence Law Center that's issuing letters to school districts. And they've identified policies in school districts that contain unconstitutional prohibitions on religious speech. So there are a couple policies that we have that need to be modified so that we're don't have exposure in this particular area. So these are pretty urgent changes for us. And again, those are policies 220 and 913. Essentially has to do with, I don't want to go into too much detail because it is somewhat complicated, but it's the distribution of material or posting of material by outside groups within a school setting, and making sure there's control over the contents or some restrictions over who that's extended to and who has access. And it's sort of a delicate constitutional issue. So as I said, I don't want to really go into too much discussion about it, but I did include in your mailing a document that kind of goes into quite a bit of detail about the rationale for that. So I'm more than willing to talk about it, but I think it's a little esoteric.
So I might have missed the memo on that, so I'll go look at my email. But under the student expression, I just had a question around, we allude to both the board at times, and then we also allude to school officials at other times. So I don't know if that's truly like, is the board, is that a board issue, is a school official the administration, or is a school official the board? So I wonder if it should, like, for instance, the board reserves the right to designate or prohibit manifestations of student expression. Is that the board through the policy, or is that the board through the policy with the administration through their action?
Yeah, I mean, the board establishes the policy and the administration follows the policy. So, and when it says school officials, my assumption would be, it would be, school administrators and the superintendent.
Okay, so that's the distinction, so we're okay in that. The only other question I had relative to policy 220 was, are we clear that what is in the policy is also called out in the student handbook, so that there's just an alignment between what's written in the policy and the behaviors that are established in the student handbook. So I didn't do a side-by-side assessment of those, but they should just be, one should be reflective of the other, I would think.
Yeah, 220, I mean, you know, all the principals could speak to this. I mean, there are situations where outside organizations want to come in and post information in a school setting. And there needs to be some control and management of that situation. I know you deal with that, Dr. Phillips, you know, and oftentimes get calls from principals, can I post this information? This has been, you know, it's a very benign source, but when you think about the fact that once you accept it from one organization, you virtually have to accept it from almost all organizations, unless you have some conditions that you can, within your policy that can restrict that. So, I think part of this policy is designed to help.
And there have been times where we didn't want to accept it, but we made to because of the, through one or through all.
And I hate to get picky on this, but on policy 913, where we talk about non-school organizations, groups, or individuals, does this apply to the sale of advertising?
I think that's, Mike, I think that's a different policy, but I think this is primarily just the information that's being disseminated by groups within the school. But you mean advertising, like if somebody's advertising an event?
At the high school gym,
Or you mean?
a banner.
You mean stuff?
It says here, if you look at page 1, the board prohibits advertisement or promotion by non-school organizations, groups of individuals during instruction time or in school-sponsored locations or activities not otherwise open to non-school organization groups or individuals. So, you know, again, being picky, but we do allow advertisements and promotions within our facilities that are paid. So does that fall under this policy, or, you know, is that?
Sponsorships, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I just, yeah, that might be, again, getting too granular, but.
Well, now's the time to look at it. This is first reading, you know, so I would suggest we, yeah, I mean, these need to be reviewed by him. There's also an optional thing on page 1 where if we check off that particular box, we don't even have to include any of that, you know, additional language, where we just basically say the board prohibits non-school organizations, groups, and from utilizing the district to engage the school community in any way, including distribution, posting of non-school materials. I mean, that could be an option for us if we choose to. I don't think that's the best way to go. I mean, we oftentimes do work with very benign and useful non-school organizations.
What we typically look to do is if it benefits the district or not. If it's an organization that wants to come in that will not benefit the district, we won't accept it. So I guess that still is the question, if they're going to advertise and they're paying for the advertising.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I read through it, it said we wouldn't accept advertising, and yet we do. So I just think we have to have some clarity around. Except that as you said, Bob, maybe what we have to do is we have to put some parameters around advertising we accept versus advertising. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but it just struck me as something.
I mean, and the language that you quoted is hyperlinked, which generally means that that's a direct quote from some kind of some school code. In this particular case, it's linked to the school code.
Let me just get some clarification.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would be even a substantive change for it to say nothing in this policy shall include apply to commercial advertising, which I thought we did deal with elsewhere.
I think there's another policy, right?
So, I mean, if we can just make that simple of a fix to say that it doesn't apply to commercial advertisement, and that is dealt with elsewhere and hyperlink to our other policy, maybe that'll cover it.
Depends on your definition of commercial advertising.
It's very fair point.
Again, I don't want to, I mean, you can really get.
Well, it's better
picky on
to
this stuff.
pick at it now and then not pick at it in court.
I can get some direction from
I think it
Alice.
does give,
A few more policies for first reading, conflict of interest. ESBA added some language to specify that we must provide a written statement that's attached to board meeting minutes when a member of the board abstains from voting, and that's a requirement of the Ethics Act. And we've done that, I mean, we've had that before, so we do have to get some, I think, a little more information about what that document actually would look like. And also, there are new provisions about the superintendent reporting and writing to a federal awarding agency in the event there's a conflict of interest with a board member relative to a vote that had to do with federal programs. So that's the rationale for changes in the conflict of interest policy. Policy 901, this public relations objectives, made some minor content updates for some better clarity. Not a whole lot of change there. That was an existing policy with some minor changes from PSBA. 903, public participation in board meetings, again, minor content updates for better clarity. And some additional language indicating that comment periods can be deferred to the next regular board meeting or special meeting occurring before the next regular meeting in accordance with the law. We have public attendance at school events. They've added a definition of tobacco and reporting requirements for incidents involving tobacco to make sure that complies with state law. And they added some language about service animals that are allowed at public events, which is also part of state law. And they're recommending an AR associated with that, or administrative regulation associated with that. And finally, a citizen advisory committee. This is a new policy. It gives the authority of the board to establish a group that select citizens who would be able to provide advisory services to the district. Not sure why it's a new policy. I'm not sure why exactly BSB is recommending it. It would be, I think, considered an optional policy for us. And there might be a question or concern about it. You might want to articulate that.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I just found it ironic that a policy that is called the Citizen Advisory Committee is limited to citizens that we would just invite exclusively. And I think the last thing that any board needs is the ability or a policy to cut off the ability to interact with all segments of the community. So I think it's too easy for people to already second guess or have questions about the transparency of a board without having a policy or putting something like this in writing. I also believe that we have sort of a committee called the Over the Fence Committee, which might not be as formalized as this, but it would seem to me that the Over the Fence Committee sort of is a citizens advisory committee that maybe we have leveraged in a way that this leverages. I mean, this appoints a chairperson, a recording secretary. You know, this gives it the heft of a board committee policy, but I'm really stunned by the members of an advisory committee are not regular meetings of the board, shall be open to the public only upon invitation of the committee. I just have a problem with that.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem, and we can talk about this, whether we strike that language that says, I think it'd be appropriate to say meetings are not regular board meetings and shall be open to the public, period. And I think that would probably address your concern, and it would also reflect, I think, what we're currently doing with the Over the Fence Committee right now. And so, you know, I consider Over the Fence Committee a citizen advisory committee.
And we talked about that. I mean, we really have, I think Michelle accessed the board liaison, so there's a chair. I mean, we have this minutes, so there's, we have recording secretary. We have those components loosely. By just putting names to those positions, we can formalize it if that's what the board chooses.
too, you might even want to rename it the Citizen Advisory Committee, because the Over the Fence Committee in its original form was not a group of people that came and met in a physical building. The idea was that information was passed out to them, and then they would go talk about it in the community to other people. So it was never really like a sit-down group. It wasn't supposed to be that. So I think this Citizen Advisory Committee type name might be better versed for that committee.
We just renamed it.
CAC.
I just have two other items. On policy 903, public participation in board meetings. I was under authority, the third sentence, the board shall require that public comments be made prior to each official action of the board. Was that an opportunity to comment before every
You know what,
action?
I am glad you brought that one up. I picked up on that one too. And I think we should strike that. I think we should just say, the board shall require that all public comments. Well, it's the next sentence I was concerned about. It says, the board shall require that all public comments on issues not related to the agenda be made at the beginning of each meeting. That's fine. The board shall require that public comments be made prior to each official action. That doesn't make sense to me. So I would actually strike that line and just indicate that all public comments would be made at the beginning of the meeting. And I think we'd be fine with that.
Could we also say something to the effect of the board may not take official action until public comments? Because I believe that's part of the sunshine law, is that the board is not able to take official action until public comment has been heard.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's true. We can investigate that. But I think we could all agree that we don't want necessarily to have public comment every time we take a vote.
I also think in that one, and I know it's a new addition, but I'd be troubled if the board never made sufficient time for public comment. I think that that's sort of a part of the reason that we have these meetings, is that there is a sufficient opportunity for the public to participate in the meeting. So it's just, I have a problem with deferring comment to the next meeting or a special meeting. I think there should always be an opportunity to comment.
Well, I think the only thing I would say to that is that, there could be an issue that's so compelling that there could be hours of public comment.
We get paid by the hour, don't we?
And I'm just saying, I would want to make sure that the board doesn't feel obligated to stay until 3 in the morning until we've exhausted all public comment in a case like that.
And then the final thing was on page 2, which is that, and I think this is just a matter of enforcing the policy, but we've had at times people who have personally directed invective at certain board members, and I think we need to enforce that policy going forward. This is the
That's a good time.
And then on policy number 901 on the public relations, I have to confess that I was just sort of a little confused by this policy, because I don't know the process, the staff, the resources, the coordination around public relations objectives. And, I particularly honed in on guideline number 4, which is communicate factual information to avoid rumors and communication crisis. And as we know, there's a crisis in facts today, let alone anything else. So as a policy, it just seemed vague to me. But I also know that we don't really have a formal public relations function. It's the superintendent is the spokesperson for the school district by and large, but there's no public relations program, a coordinated, developed program. That's not to say we don't have public relations, or that we don't have stakeholder communications. I just don't. This was just vague to me.
Yeah, if you have some suggestions for making it less vague, that would be great. But I see this as just sort of being a guide for how we disseminate information to the community, whether it's through our newsletters, our website, or community forums, our social media, just to make sure that we continually emphasize the fact that we need to get information out to the community. But if you have any specific suggestions, anybody, for the modification of this policy, please just send your comments to Don and Apple.
Yeah, I have some concerns, similar concerns, having written comprehensive public relations plans. This almost seemed like a page from one of those plans that I wrote in one of my previous, wearing one of my previous hats. Does the district have a comprehensive public relations plan with how to handle crisis communications, how to handle different kinds of things?
That would be in the all hazard plan that Dr. Miller, we would pull that out and follow that if there is an active shooter, if there is an incident in the district that is written in a binder, a book, or we have to follow how to do it. Setting up a command post, different things like that.
Right, but that's one kind of problem organizations can face.
If you're asking, we don't have for every problem that you can
So-
think of, we do not have.
So do we have a comprehensive public relations plan in general that covers everything that an organization might face?
Again, incidents, yes, and what we will face, no.
That might be something that we would want to look at, so that we don't get caught with our pants down.
Are you aware of an organization that might have a plan like that, John?
I'm not, but I mean, we have BCIU at our disposal. We can make calls to other districts. Do they have public relations plans? I think that would be helpful. Maybe the school board, the state association might have some guidelines.
I mean, some districts actually have somebody.
I know,
They hire
yes.
somebody who, and at one time we had Don Kramer. Don Kramer was, an administrator who was very involved in helping to respond to situations, and he filled the gaps in a lot of different areas. But that position no longer exists. So we may have lost some of that benefit as a result.
Yeah, I think, for example, it also, I'm thinking of a picture that appeared on social media of a dumpster filled with desks and chairs. If you have a comprehensive plan, you will have trained individuals who might think about putting those desks and chairs in a dumpster, not to do that without telling somebody first what you're doing. In other words, public relations is more than just responding. It's, I don't like the word, but it's being proactive and trying to manage the expectations of your various publics. And that's the advantage of having someone. I know at Mifflin, they have a former reporter from Channel 69 who does their PR. That's the kind of person you need. That's how I got into PR, from having been a newspaper reporter.
Right.
Now, am I recommending that we spend X times $10,000 a year on that? Not necessarily, but I think it behooves us to have some sort of comprehensive plan that uses this one that we have before us, but that is, again, more comprehensive, more far-reaching.
Well, Melissa, who is the representative, the employee at Governor Mifflin, John, that you're referencing, she's an Exeter Township resident, so maybe we could reach out to her and just see if she has some insight to share for the good of the district.
Sure.
I can reach out to Dr.
And her husband is also the public relations officer for the Exeter Police Department, so he might have some insight that we can lean on a little bit as well.
Yeah, we'll say, I mean, this is a policy that has existed in our manual. I mean, this is not a new policy. It's just been tweaked for clarification purposes, but doesn't mean, things can't be added or changed. Or perhaps, again, a reference to a public relations plan. in the policy, that it needs to be developed and followed, and consistent with the basic, goals, the objectives of this plan.
I had a question too about 220. Dave, you said we'd heard from some organization. What was the name of that organization again?
It was the,
Independence Law Center?
Was that it? No, it wasn't the Law Center. It was the Independence Law Center.
Independent, thank you.
They represent the Pennsylvania Family Council, I think, or they're attached to the PA Family Council.
I don't know, but, apparently they've been,
I'm pretty sure they are.
yeah, I'm not sure if this is just happening in Pennsylvania or whether it's nationwide, but, the alert went out. And they were suggesting that we should address it quickly.
Can you just say in 913 too, there's a section on scholarships and that the board needs to approve scholarships from any outside organizations? So I don't think that's something that we do currently, but we might want to.
I'm sure. It's mostly, again, the foundation, the alumni association, different families. I'm not sure if we have any outside ones.
But like at the senior?
Mr. Cameron, offhand, Jason, maybe. We have a lot of local family scholarships, foundation, alumni association, different things. Do we have any outside agencies that provide scholarships? Offhand. It doesn't strike, but maybe I'm there.
Give me one, I'm thinking off the top of my head is Victor Maine. Outside group, right?
Or like the teacher, like in between the Valley and education. They're education, but they're out, It's just
There are
something-
teachers, I don't know if I would, I don't know, how about
There's a
outside?
long list. I would really need to consult down in guidance to take a look at all
You
of that.
might have to, because the board has to approve those outside agencies.
Well, it doesn't really say outside, the board is appreciative of the generosity of organizations that offer scholarships or awards to deserving students. And in accepting such offers, the board directs that established criteria be observed. And one of the things is all pertinent information when it's a scholarship award shall be approved by the board. So, like, before that senior banquet, should we have a list of all those?
I think so. I think we need to generate that list from the counselors and present it to the board for the senior awards.
I'm even like wondering something like this.
Right,
Like,
okay.
Yoko Marnes Institute, somebody won a cash award.
But that's outside agency doing it, that's not us doing it. Do we even, do we have to prove what somebody else did?
That's something
That's
that.
an outside agency with an outside organization. Like our kids are going there.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, if we're having our awards night and people are coming into our district to give the awards.
I don't know, it's something to look at.
There's some, in this policy, it definitely will need some administrative attention because there's some bracketed options under fundraising, under scholarship awards, under travel and foreign trips that needs to be clarified. So
The high school curriculum.
yeah, so it's 913. And I know this just went out. This is the first reading, so people haven't had a chance to really kind of digest it that much. But where we have that bracketed information sections, we have an option to accept it or reject the language we're having. So unless there are any other questions about the policies, there were just a few more that were represent deletions. There's a state mandate waiver policy that apparently is no longer necessary, and privacy of health information, which has to do with HIPAA, and that apparently is no longer necessary as well, according to the SBA. So those are the two deleted policies. Any other comments, questions about policies? If not, we're going to move on to business functions. Mr. Aaron's.
Best part of the night. So I'm just going to introduce a couple of things, and then I want to turn it over to Ann to talk about the buses, and then we'll have a quick discussion, which I don't think will feature a whole lot of questions, but just a quick discussion about the extension of our bank depository. So we'll have several items, including budget transfers and joint purchasing contracts. There will also be the mini bids for the education purchasing program of microcomputers. Our audit reports for our tax collectors was included in this evening's paperwork, and we'll also be approving our share of the budget for the BCIU 2021 budget. And do you want to talk about the purchases of the leasing service and the wet hosing, and then I'll talk about the extension of the bank depository?
Okay, the recommendation for replacement of buses is for 2 77-passenger propane buses, 1 54-passenger diesel-powered, and 1 28-passenger wheelchair diesel-powered. See, Brightville had more favorable prices. The plan is to finance these as a capital lease purchase. We did receive, as part of our bid or request for proposal, the 5-year term. Obviously, in lieu of outlaying a cash amount of over $360,000, it would be an annual payment of approximately $79,000. I haven't firmed up the financing. Municipal financing does provide better rates. There's another source that I am checking, but the reason we're approving to go ahead with this is we need to put our purchase order in for the buses. What will happen in the meantime is I will secure the financing. The order will be placed, Brightville will put the order in, and then I'll obtain the financing proposal, come back to the board, get that approved, just like we do with technology, where we approve the purchase, but we also approve financing. So that is the recommendation. Rick and Ben from Transportation provided some feedback from school districts that use propane, and it was positive feedback. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions on that. The propane buses, since it's just 2, will be wet hosed. Where E.J. Smith will come to our site and fuel them once or twice per week. And that's basically it on that.
And for the point A on the voting agenda next week, can we just have a bolded figure of the total cost of the district for, I guess it's those 4 buses?
Okay.
And then for the propane and wet hosing service, have we not identified a price cost for that at this point?
When I talked about this last month, I provided a summary. At that point in time, E.G. Smith gave us a fixed price or a floating price, and at that point in time, it was $1.20. So once this is approved, I will go back to E.G. Smith and make the decision whether whatever that fixed price is at that point in time, try to secure that, or they want to do it just like we do with the BCIU. Make the determination, is it better to go fixed or a floating? Probably, I have to make that determination. We'll come back to the board with what it's going to be.
That was my next question. And then just switching gears quick to the extension of the bank depository. Ann and I discussed early on in December about normally what the district would do at this point in time is discuss and start moving towards identifying other financial institutions through an RFP process to use as our banking institution. We currently use PNC Bank and PSDLAF, which is the PA School District Liquid Asset Fund. Basically, they use investments that are permitted under state law for municipalities and school districts to get us a better rate of return regularly. We've already done a one-year extension with this group. I believe that was done last year in 2019, and we're recommending, the Business Functions Committee is recommending that we do a 2-year extension for a couple of reasons. The first one being that we have a lot of different moving pieces right now with the finance and business department that they're focusing on, and this one is a labor-intensive one that may not make a whole lot of sense right now to do a whole lot of changes, because we don't expect to get a huge rate of return difference from any other financial institution if we were to switch. There are also impending retirements in the business office that would make it very difficult, I think, to manage the transition while also onboarding those new staff on top of all the projects that the business office is working on right now. So Ann and Elena are both asking that we consider doing this 2-year extension. We asked a few questions at Business Functions Committee about any challenges that they've had with the current institution, any notes that our auditors have pointed out, and there haven't been any challenges that she was concerned about continuing with them, or any notes that our auditors have made about any errors that they've made with their investments, which was an issue that we had with the previous financial institution. So I think the Business Functions Committee was comfortable with the recommendation for a 2-year extension, and we're bringing that up to the board. And at this point, I guess I'm interested to hear if anybody has concerns about that, because if we do, what we're going to do is talk about what we want to move forward with at the February Business Functions meeting, so we can have some type of direction finalized by the February voting meeting.
That's your report?
Well,
I agree.
I guess I take that as no concerns are had, so.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any objection.
Okay, so that'll be on the agenda for voting as it appears here at the February meeting, or at the voting meeting.
If I may, just a comment on the buses, and I didn't jump in, Hunter, you switched gears faster than I could react. And I just wanted to thank you and Rick and Ben for that information comparing, or the real-life reports from those other companies. That was very helpful, so I appreciate it. Just wanted to get that on the record.
I think one of the greatest experiences to go behind one of these buses and put your face right at the tailpipe and realize there's not any exhaust.
How many
times have you been doing it? It's an experience. Like compared to a diesel, I mean, which has such awful emissions, and it's as clean as it's clean, it's quiet. They start up really well. They start up in the winter. They operate very smoothly and low maintenance. So I'm really excited to maybe get you ride on one of these.
Stand behind them.
Stand behind them.
Bus drivers.
Dave, if they're as clean and as quiet as a nuclear reactor, I'll be in favor.
Well, they don't have the long-term implications as
There's a classic example of a public relations opportunity, by the way. And I mentioned to Sharon that it would be cool if we invited Pat Pija to our next meeting to let her know that we were finally moving forward. We'll just keep her out of voting about certificating staff.
And possibly maybe having her on the first run, or at least the first trip, it would be nice.
We can put a bus in her honor.
There you go.
Right, Dave.
Maybe somebody wants to sponsor that.
There you go. Well, that's not part of the advertisement, but we got to check the policy for it. Yes.
As a matter of fact, what's the time frame from once we order this to it actually coming into the township? Maybe we should have some kind of thing about it.
Parade or something?
Why not? For clean energy.
Dave wants to be behind it.
Ribbon cutting. Seriously.
Well, it'll definitely be here after July 1. It is a fiscal 2021 purchase for financing, so after July 1.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll leave it down.
Sure, sure.
Well, hopefully for May days, we'll just have a
move on, I say that out loud.
We'll move on to the next, we'll move on to the next section of the agenda, Personnel Committee. Mrs. Wilson.
You're going to be looking at retirements of Dr. Sue Miller and our certificated staff, Deb Bittler, Teresa Fiddler, and Mary Jo Smith. We will also be looking at change of status of support staff, leaves of absence, one leave of absence, course requests, conference requests, and also a memorandum of understanding to have one K-12 school counseling chairperson again.
Any questions? Okay, well, we're going to move on to student functions, and unless anyone wants to. I can handle.
You can handle it.
Okay. Yeah, we have field trips that we'll be reporting on, field trips within a 60-mile radius, and then field trips beyond the 60-mile radius. An agreement with News Story for special education services. The 2020-21 school calendar will be subject to and an agreement regarding waiver of an expulsion hearing. Any questions? Okay, we're going to move on to curriculum programs and curriculum committee. Dr. McClendon.
Okay, so next week we're going to be voting on the approving the 2020-2021 Soaring Eagle program of studies for the senior high and also for the junior high. And we met, the curriculum committee met before this meeting, and most of the meeting was Mr. Flam and Mr. Campbell talking about all of the changes and giving rationale for those changes, and we do have attachments with everything. I want to just mention a couple. So there are changes to the course, some of the course names and offerings, but not changes to the curriculum. One of them is the entrepreneurship and international business are going to be now offered on a alternating year basis, and that is to improve scheduling efficiency. And there's a number of other changes with course names and offerings. Another thing I wanted to point out was the changing of the rank for the AP courses. Currently, the language is that if the student takes the AP exam, they receive a 1.10 ranking, and the students who didn't got a 1.05. So that's going to be changed so that all students, regardless of whether they take the AP exam, will get a 1.1. Let's see what else. I think that was on that. But another thing was the changing of the rank for BCTC technical academies and medical health professions. So that, as you know, I will always talk about the exceptional work that they're doing at the BCTC. So I'm really pleased to see that those courses are the weight is going to change from 1 to 1.05 because they are designed to be honors level courses. So they're, Mr. Campbell and Mr. Flynn are here, so if you have any other things you wanted them to talk to you about, but they spent a lot of time and there are a number of changes, they're all listed there. So, anything more you want to know about that? So we'll be voting on that, then yes.
Thank you, Dr. McClendon. Before we adjourn, I just want to announce that the board will meet in executive session following the meeting for the purposes of legal and personal matters. So at this point, unless there are any comments from board members, Ann, would you like to say something?
I wanted to wish good luck to our students participating in tonight's mock trial competition at Northampton County Courthouse. Very excited for them.
Thank you. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.